Hello, and welcome to the May RCA discussion and webinar. The topic this month is the RCA implementation process. My name is Larry White, and I'm the Executive Director of the RCA Institute. After the presentation, I'll unmute everyone, and we can discuss, and I can handle any questions, or if you have any issues you want to bring up or challenges or whatever, you'll be able to do that. You can mute yourself again. You can mute yourself again after I do that. The other thing is this webinar is being recorded. When I get to the question and discussion part, I will turn off the recording, so any questions or discussions you bring up will not be recorded. So let's go ahead and get started. Oh, if you have questions during my presentation, you can use the chat feature or the question feature. I won't be able to check them, though, until the end of the presentation. Okay, so operations, one of RCA takes a philosophical view that operations create value and that financial information should present value creation opportunities. Value creation decisions are fundamentally operating process and resource decisions. Everyone likes to think they're finance decisions, but they're really operating process and resource decisions. Does your company's costing help you see the opportunities to create value within your operations? And we'll discuss how RCA does this a little bit more as we go through the presentation. So I always go over this slide. RCA is a combination of German management accounting techniques called Grenzplan, Kosten, Rechnen, or we shorten it to GPK, that have been in use in Germany for a long time, since the 1940s, and they are actively used by many companies still today. In Germany, management accounting tends to be known as controlling, and that sort of controlling is a very different thing than what people in the US think of as the controlling function. But the focus of RCA is internal management decision making, not external financial reporting. The goal is to link operational metrics to finance and to maintain and show the clear cause and effect operational relationships with financial numbers. Now, this slide is from the International Federation of Accountants Best Practice Guide. And what it shows is that, managerial accounting is really cost measurement, and cost measurement is done fundamentally for three purposes. One is external financial reporting, which we call cost accounting. Then you do it for performance evaluation and analysis, and also for planning ahead and decision support. One of the interesting things about this line, I think, is down at the bottom, where it shows the value added from these activities going lower as you go to the left and higher as you go to the right. RCA focuses on performance evaluation and analysis and planning and decision support for managers inside the company. RCA produces enough information to do cost accounting, but requires some what I call dumbing down or distortion, so we won't deal with that. RCA focuses on reflecting current operations, creating information for optimizing decisions without the distortions injected by the artificial time horizons and standardized conventions of generally accepting accounting practices. What RCA seeks to do is model reality and produce information to make solid projections and analysis. The result is better, faster operating decisions and better investment and improvement decisions. In earlier sessions, I've talked about RCA modeling. Hopefully you've seen those, but there are 3 core steps associated with RCA modeling or RCA implementation. First is identify the resources. Second is identify the resource relationships. And third is apply costs to the model. Now, this is not how most costing models are built. Most costing models are financial models and tend to follow financial statement rules or use the same data as financial statements. RCA seeks to be, and is to the extent possible, an operational model. So we start with this operational model with the first 2 steps, and then apply cost in a manner that reflects the nature of the operational model and not just the constraints of a financial accounting general ledger. So let's talk about the implementation, and this is an overview. And you see the steps here are not dramatically different from the steps associated with almost any major IT project. The core of a resource consumption accounting implementation is conceptual design. It's hard to get to a better place or the place you want if you don't know what it looks like. And cost accounting for financial reporting tends to dominate most financial and ERP systems. If you want more than that, if you want something different, you've got to know what you want. And the conceptual design phase is where that happens. Realization the realization phase is applying the conceptual design to the software tool. And of course, the beginning and the end of the process are fairly common with all projects. And I'll just touch on the RCA specific issues associated with those. So let's go through the steps. Startup and planning. The most important thing to get a project started is, to be dramatic, if you need a burning platform, you need a reason to invest in improved management accounting. And this is a hard case to make. I mean, accountants are very comfortable saying we need a new general ledger, we need a new financial system for financial reporting, because that's a hard requirement. But the battle, the convincing necessary to show that you need a new costing platform is a harder case, because to some extent you have to impugn the costing that's done for the financial statement. So what works in this area? The first is, and I say here, link operational data to financial impact. But really what you get into is, if you have a disconnect between what's going on in your operations and the financial budgeting, financial results, in particularly the short term, if you're facing conflicts, if every time the accountant speaks, the operations folks start to fight about it, then that's a reason, because there's a major disconnect in the company, and the quote unquote, a phrase I really hate, the one version of the truth simply isn't working for your management. if you're having difficulty exercising cost control, simply because what your financial accounting system is telling you about cost doesn't seem to pan out operationally. If there's uncertainty about product and service profitability, this often happens because of peanut butter spreads of overhead, because of um, weird depreciation circumstances, like people still want to use a fully depreciated line when you have a brand new line that produces the same product. If you have strange things going on, if your product costs and profitability tend to fluctuate dramatically with volume and mix, that's a reason. And the other one way to do this is to start small with small scale trial projects, show that things can be better, and then spend more money implementing them more broadly. Let's talk about the scope and charter area. The big issue here is how much of the organization to include. Do you include just operations and production, support, sales, marketing, administration, finance, the whole thing? We think it's best if you do the entire organization. But sometimes if you're going to start small, you kind of have to pick one area. And generally, we've found that the operations production area tends to be the place most people start. You need solid project management practices in place. Because RCA is really a total organizational effort. We've seen projects that work with operations in the lead and with finance in the lead, but we haven't seen many that work where one or the other of those is excluded. It really needs to have a total organizational commitment. And then it has been effectively used for segments of the organization, for instance, just operations, to get better information. Some of the things we've seen that have contributed to success of RCA implementations is we've actually seen somewhat more success where operations is leading the charge rather than finance. A lot of times operations has a problem with financial information that they're being held accountable for. And of course, maybe the finance group doesn't see that as a problem, but there's a little bit of defensiveness involved, and those projects have tended to show a little bit higher commitment than finance run projects. Trial projects work. And then no matter what you do, you're going to need a dedicated and very credible representative from finance, because some of the things that you do to reflect operational information and reflect the operational model are going to be dramatically different than your existing costing model for financial reporting. And somebody's going to have to keep that in make that explanation. Our advice is to keep the focus on value from operations. That's what you're really trying to do, not financially model, but to show and create value from the operations. It doesn't have to just be production operations. It can be any operation, but production and your service providing operations are usually the core of the business. Conceptual design. Let's talk about it in a little bit more depth. A conceptual design or model serves as the roadmap to deploy the enabling technology solution. It is going to be the kind of the picture that management and everyone looks at to see if what you're doing really looks like your operations and can really improve your operations. It communicates and manages management's expectations about the capability of RCA, and it serves as a guide for the implementation project team as you move into realization. So what needs to be done? First, you need to spend a lot of time defining and understanding the strategic objectives of the organization. What are the frequent and significant decisions your organization makes to internally create value from resources and processes? So it's not just strategic, but it's also something tactical. Maybe if you're in a company that has arguments about this stuff, what causes the arguments? Those are the things that you need to sort out and build your cost system to make it work better. You need to model the resources, you need to model the processes and the resource relationships. That's the operational model first. Then you've got to identify financial information that will reflect the operational model. Whoops, sorry, I jumped ahead. And finally, you've got to outline the user presentation requirements. In other words, what kind of information will users want to see, and how does that need to be presented to have an impact on the organization? This is actually what a small scale conceptual design looks like. It's really a map of the organizations. And I know this one's extremely hard to see. Some of them go on, most of them, and this one should go on to be seen for multiple pages. This is a very condensed version. What we have here at the top is support and admin type activities in the green. The red was the production floor. The yellow are the products and services. And then the gray area is what we call the multi-dimensional results. For instance, if you need to do not only product costing, but customer costing, if you need to do distribution channel, there are some, there's a lot of information in RCA, and it can support multiple dimensions and multiple ways of looking at the data inside your organization. This little area off to the side was kind of a special case for this situation because it created in its process, it had kind of a continuous process, and it created excess materials that were used, and they had to be kind of inventoried. They were kept to a minimum, but they're still inventoried and used in later projects. What we call this is, we used to call it just a conceptual design. Now we call it a connected value map, because if this were a little bigger, and if somebody from this operation looked at this, they would be able to see the various resources and processes that they work in. So what works well with conceptual design? You've probably got an idea right now. First is cross-functional teams. You need to have people from operations, finance, and any other area you're modeling involved. You got to have deadlines, and mostly the deadline is for collecting the data, because sometimes the finance people aren't as familiar with operational data as they should be. And then the finance people also often need to create some data to support the operational model. You need an executive champion, like almost any project, somebody who's going to keep the project visible and advocate for it at the senior levels. And we think, and we found that starting with the benefits to operations first makes sense, maintaining a mission orientation, not just a purely financial outcome organization, but this idea of what's the core mission of this company as to how it creates value. Okay, the realization step is really about selecting the software tool for RCA, then configuring the tool to support the conceptual design. Uh, it does get into gathering and creating, particularly interfaces and ongoing processes, the necessary operational and financial data. Increasingly for companies using Industry 4.0 techniques, an operational model tends to be more available. We've actually found the bigger challenge is getting financial data in a form that can support the operational model. And sometimes that has to go through several iterations or rounds of improvement to get to where it needs to be. And then defining and configuring the data architecture to feed the RCA software. So you're going to need, interfaces, APIs, whatever you want to call them, to do this efficiently. However, increasingly this is possible, and we do have some RCA models that are operating in, very, very close to, within minutes for real time. Moving on to the next section, testing, training, and go live. Things that work for this are having a wide variety of managers and supervisors involved in the training and the testing, making sure they understand and can use what's being developed. Decision scenario training works well. That way managers can challenge with the typical or problematic decisions they've had to deal with and put those to the test. That builds a lot of confidence. RCA information will be very different from the information they're used to, particularly if you do traditional standard costing and not that much more. And of course, doing a trial project, makes this a little bit smaller and more manageable, and helps to sell it throughout the organization. Finally, evaluation is the final step, and actually evaluation is an ongoing step. One of the problems a lot of management accounting or managerial costing systems run into is somebody or some group champions this thing, sets it up, and then they move along, and all of a sudden it's not being used. So you need to, if this is a strategic initiative, if this is producing value creating information, you need to set up regular evaluations. And, it needs to come from the senior level. Is the RCA information being used? Is the model being maintained? Because you're going to have new data, you're going to have resource changes, you're going to have process changes. Has there been any changes to the strategic objective and the nature of decisions? And one of the things the RCA Institute does is offer post-implementation and periodic evaluations so that, people can bring in someone from the outside to, give them a little evaluation about what's going on and how well they're maintaining and using their RCA system. So just to finish up, software and financial systems often tend to define the managerial costing or management accounting approach, or the implementing consultants for a financial system tend to have a preferred method that they're comfortable with and they push you toward. When you depart from the world of regulatory cost accounting, you kind of leave rules behind, at least the rules you've long known and are familiar with. You need to replace those rules with principles. And now, to aid you, there is the conceptual framework for managerial costing that the IMA maintains as an SMA. And the principles there are causality and analogy. And now there's other statements of management accounting that have more detailed implementation and assessment information for that. You need to represent the reality of your operations for decision making, and that will improve your profitability and optimize the use of your resources. The conceptual design phase of RCA is really the step here that makes the biggest difference, and where RCA specific knowledge comes most into play. So I'm going to stop my recording.